Coleman Report Live, third quarter fiscal year, the last Coleman Report of the 9 months ending June 30th. Lance, where's the time going?
Bob, the year's going by quickly, and not only is it an important time to get all your loans put in the system and continue to push forward, but it's an important time to service and make sure those past dues are in good shape as well.
Hey, we have a ton of questions, so let's get to the polls right away. You know how to ask. Please, on these questions, we're getting all these great questions. Feel free to send them during the week. Lance is great at getting back to them. These questions are based on a webinar Lance did yesterday on litigation plans. And this is the most popular poll question. And we're not going to track you by IP addresses, so don't worry about that. But have you ever started litigation against an SBA loan customer without completing the litigation plan for approval by SBA?
Well, and I think, Bob, it's a great question because, you don't have to get it approved by SBA unless it meets one of three categories. So, I think a lot of banks think it's okay to start litigation without having a litigation plan.
Yesterday's answers, it was a split 50-50, and today it's one-third, one-third, one-half. Lance, what do you tell the 34% that are started without the litigation plan? What is your best practice advice to say, we're in trouble, we need this?
Well, it's very clear that a litigation plan should be in place irregardless of the budget size, irregardless of whether or not the litigation is contested. Another great reason, I've had 2 or 3 phone calls in the last month, Bob, where participant lenders had litigation going on. They had not gotten an approved litigation plan, and expenses ballooned up over $10,000. And we got a poll question, and I'm not going to go too deep, but that can be problematic. If you already have the litigation plan prepared, you're ready to add a couple of comments and submit. You need a litigation plan on any and all SBA loans that have litigation involved.
Number 2, are you using SBA 1 to manage loans in active default for more than 3 years?
Well, Bob, this is a great question. And just to share with our participants, which are a bunch of bankers on the call today, Bob, SBA 1's a great way to take a look at. I know when your loans that have been in liquidation for more than 3 years. When the SOP 5057-2 came out, there was a mandate that we would wrap up loans where the guarantee had been paid within 24 months of that guarantee payment date. And SBA has the right to invoice you if you don't complete the wrap-up in a timely way or request a wrap-up extension. If you go into SBA 1 and you look in the upper right-hand corner, you can see your PARA score. Click on that. There are a number of drop-down categories. One is loans that are in liquidation for more than 3 years. If there's a loan in liquidation for more than 3 years, you can rest assured that that probably needs to be wrapped up, or an extension needs to be presented for a wrap-up, or a request needs to be presented for a wrap-up extension.
Yeah, this is not something to ignore and hope it goes away. It will come back to haunt you. So for you 62%, do what Lance said and go to SBA 1. If you don't know how to do that, there's very detailed instructions on SBA's website on how to access it. There's emails to send. Please designate someone in your department to do that. And please do that for you.
And I think the great point is SBA 1 is more than a tool to originate loans, create documents. There's some servicing functionality in the PARA score. There's some managerial information that you can use to manage your SBA lending effort. And at some point in the future, we're going to have servicing and liquidation abilities in SBA 1 as well.
I hope. And they've been promising that for
a long time, Bob.
Yeah, I hope they do that, because that's going to make your job as a liquidator in pulling together all of these documents much more easier.
SBA moves slowly, Bob. About 2 years ago, when we first launched the SBA 1 certification training, we were telling the participants that there will be a day when the servicing and liquidation button becomes active. It's not yet.
We'll be right one of these days. Let's go. I want to follow up on the conversation that we had with Brent Trelina last week. I thought he was a great guest in Lance's absence. And Lance and I have been talking about this, and I just sort of want to get a sense of the industry. Are you personally concerned that SBA is more of a regulator now than ever? And I just want to get a sense of what people are feeling. And Lance, hold on before you weigh in. Let the votes come in. Okay, Lance, what do you say?
Well, I don't know. Most of our participant lenders probably should not be concerned, because if you're operating prudently, there shouldn't be any concern that SBA is now in a position to be more of a regulator. Congress has taken great interest in SBA's regulation of their participant banks, and they're giving SBA more power and more tools to properly regulate their participant lenders. But if you're doing things the right way, if you're doing things prudently, I don't see what difference.
I agree with you, Lance. If you make a mistake and you have one file that doesn't have the credit elsewhere certification, you are not going to be fined for that. You're going to have issues if you totally ignore credit elsewhere in every file. Common mistakes are not going to be hammered by SBA to you. Where you are going to have an issue is if you're, quote, a rogue lender, and we all know who those are. If you're pushing the envelope, then you're going to have an issue. So for you, 57%, I would not lose sleep over it. It is another hammer, since I use that word, in SBA's toolkit to go after lenders. But from what little I've read in the intent of what the agency is doing, I don't see that as a concern. It needs to be on your radar, but I wouldn't lose sleep over it.
Well, and the thing about SBA, Bob, we've talked about this so many times on webinars, on Coleman Report Live. SBA doesn't want to play gotcha. That's not what they're into. If you make a mistake on a loan, that's fine. But if you have a portfolio of 50 loans and you have the same mistake in all 50 loans,
they already have the ability to repair a guarantee, to deny a guarantee. They're not going to go above and beyond and fine you unless there's egregious mistakes. And the common mistakes, as SBA has said over and over, is there are lenders who are not even addressing credit elsewhere certification in their credit memos, or they're not wrapping up their loans. So that's where you have a concern. Hey, we have a ton of questions. Let's get into them. This is a great question. Lance, you've done some homework.
well,
If
we
we don't
did
have
a
a
webinar.
plan, can we get the 10 grand?
Bob, we did a webinar yesterday on litigation plans, and preparation of a litigation plan, like we talked about earlier, must be done anytime there's litigation on an SBA loan. And one of the things I was talking about, you may have the best intentions of not exceeding the $10,000 limit that requires SBA's approval. And you get halfway through litigation, you realize that you needed SBA's approval. On a litigation plan, the only time it does need to be approved by SBA is if budgeted expenses exceed $10,000 or it is contested litigation. Now, best practice that I mentioned in the webinar yesterday, Bob, is if you've got a litigation budget coming from your legal counsel and that litigation budget is, say, $6,500 or $7,000, throw you a contingency in there and bring it up to $10,000 so you can get it approved by SBA. You will never, as a participant bank, be penalized for litigation that costs less than your budget. You can be penalized by not getting approval of a litigation plan and your expenses exceed $10,000. Now, the SOP language doesn't really address at what level can you get reimbursement if you blow past the $10,000 mark. I picked up the telephone and called someone at SBA who's in a director's position. We talked about the SOP 5057-2. I told them what my thoughts were, and they concurred. If you have a litigation plan and your legal fees exceed $10,000, it requires approval from SBA. That doesn't mean just the amount over $10,000, Bob. That's the full amount. So every dollar spent has to be on a litigation plan over 10K has to be approved. The answer from SBA is, let's say you spend $15,000 in litigation, don't do a litigation plan, don't get it approved. None of those expenses will be considered reimbursable by SBA because you did not complete a litigation plan and you did not get it approved. Now, I know there are a lot of banks who, when they do this, they want to submit $9,999. And the answer is you will not get reimbursed for that money. You need to have an approved litigation plan.
Lance did a great best practice advice to everyone. Remember, your local district council in the district that the loan was made will have the final authority on approving these plans. So make sure you reach out. This is a great way to network with your local districts. Meet the district director, meet the district council, pick up the phone, send them an email and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, because even though it goes to Herndon, the local district council will approve these plans.
Well, and again, Bob, two other best practices to always think about in litigation. Again, if it's pretty simple, it's going to cost a couple thousand. Don't worry about it. Do a simple litigation plan, stick it in your file. If it's over $5,000, beef up your budget, get it to $10,000, get it approved. Because again, SBA is never going to penalize you for coming in under the mark. They're only going to penalize you for coming in over the mark. And the second best practice, when you engage legal counsel, you're going to get a copy of their malpractice insurance. You're going to get a copy of their license showing the ability to conduct litigation in the state where the borrower, where you're going to take it to court. You also need a budget from legal counsel. But I like a timeline budget as well, Bob, because a lot of these cases where litigation expenses blow up beyond $10,000 are because there's no emphasis on timeliness necessarily established at the beginning of litigation.
One of our common themes that Lance and I are preaching is do it. It doesn't have to be extensive. It can be a short summary. We don't need to have a 10, 15, 20 page step-by-step. Just give a short summary. Where lenders get themselves in trouble is they ignore this requirement. Hey, let's move on. We have a bunch of other questions. Tina was our star yesterday with a bunch of questions. Tina says, hey, I know I have to look at my legal counsel's state bar site to make sure they still are in good standing. Can I do this on an annual basis, or do I need to check it every time we cut a check?
Well, there's no language in the SOP that tells you how often you should check. If your bank's prudent lending practice is checking on an annual basis, Bob, I'm okay with checking it on an annual basis.
Tina asked a question about block entry. I have no idea what that means, even though I was listening to your webinar yesterday on legal invoices. What is the issue here, Lance? I think that I'm not exactly sure what question she's asking here, Bob. I think I know, and the answer is yes, it should be addressed with legal invoices from your attorney. Sometimes they don't put enough detail in the invoice to substantiate the charge, and I think that's what the question is, Bob. So absolutely. We want a detail on the attorney invoices. We want them broken out. We just
the deal is
at $500 an hour.
A lot of legal counsel invoices, you'll get 12 hours, partner, $300 an hour, $3,600. There needs to be more detail.
Okay, very good. Tina, now this is interesting. She says she has received charge-offs on smaller loans, express loans under 350 or loans under 350, but did not complete the wrap-up report. This surprised me at the time. The question is, even though it's been charged off, do I still need to go back and do a wrap-up report?
Here's the thing, Bob. There's two ways to look at this. You can go into eTran and you can run a loan listing. If SBA truly charges it off and it's no longer an SBA system, I don't think you have to do a wrap-up report. But if the loan still exists in the SBA system, you need to go ahead and complete a wrap-up report and submit it to SBA. And the best way to check that is to go into eTran, and once you go into eTran servicing, you can do a search and pull up your loan list. You can probably simplify and just search those loans that are in liquidation, but you need to make sure if SBA charged it off that it's no longer in the system.
Excellent. And we can do that through SB1. Hey, Paul has a situation where we have a borrower who's working with us to liquidate the assets, but then they, quote, went underground. What should we do? The further part of this question is minimal assets from the guarantors. There's no equity on the house where we have a second lien. What should we do?
Well, in this case, it appears that you've got guarantors that are working with you to liquidate the assets, and then they disappear. In one of the places where it talks about it's okay to submit your purchase demand kit, it's okay to recommend charge off on an SBA loan, is when the guarantors are unable to pay or the guarantors cannot be located. So the answer is yes, go ahead and request the SBA guarantee. And if you've liquidated all of the collateral of any value and applied it to the loan, go ahead and recommend wrap up and charge off.
Best practice, though, are you going to release that lien on the house even though there's not enough equity in it?
You know, I told a story yesterday in the webinar, Bob. I owned a electronics business. Guy bought a camcorder. I used to do some in-store credit. Didn't pay me. Got a small claims court judgment. About 4 years later, when I had forgotten about it, Bob, he got married. The guy kind of straightened up, got married, wanted to buy a house. Guess what he had to do to get a loan to buy the house? He had to come back and pay for that camcorder. Same thing's true on junior mortgages on their houses. Now, you can release them. There's nothing that says you can't, but it can be a source of additional recovery. You don't know what's going to happen 3 or 4 years down the road. They may want to refinance. They may want to buy a bigger home, and there may be an opportunity for recovery from that. So my best practice is don't release it.
But you're going to, quote, abandon the collateral in your wrap-up report. You're just going to leave the lien on there. And I know different states, I agree with Lance.
Hey, guys, SBA's not going to...
Nothing that's going to happen with you leaving the lien.
SBA's not going to be upset with you if you send them a recovery after the loan has been charged off. If you send them a recovery at pay.gov, they're not going to be upset.
Hey, I want to make sure we send this out once a week. Make sure your CFO is on our list if they want to see the secondary market prices. We do this every week. We do it both for 78504. And as you can see in there, the rates are staying fairly constant. We bring Bob Judge in once a month to talk about the secondary market. We know it's important, and we're following that very carefully. SBA has new executives. The takeaway on this is we are waiting for the confirmation hearing for the new administrator. Currently, she's the treasurer of the United States. Her name's on the dollar bill, so that we forget what her name is. It's easy to figure out. But SBA is still chugging along, and they're operating with all the changes that are happening. I am a huge fan of these regional conferences. I know last week a lot of you said you're planning on attending, so we put these up just to reinforce that. We are starting our summer quarter training. Please take advantage of that. Lance, again, was an award winner in our industries, closing, underwriting, and also our express training courses. So those are going to be active. We started the second week of July for the summer quarter. So please take a look at those and let's get your staff trained on that. And with that, I have one question. I'm going to read it cold. And so Lance, we'll see if we're going to play Stump the Professor.
Okay.
Corey asked, we have an approved extension due to an offer and compromise on a loan that SBA has purchased from us. We have received multiple approvals for extensions. This is of the over 3 years due to the offer and compromise. But the loan is still listed on our active default over 3-year list. Is this something we should be concerned about? What should we do?
Well, if you've got approved wrap-up extensions, there's no concern whatsoever. SBA designates and knows which loans have wrap-up extensions. In fact, when you do your quarterly report to SBA, they'll send you a pre-populated report, and typically it'll say approved wrap-up extension over in the comments. But if you have an approved wrap-up extension, I don't think there's a concern. Where the concern would be is if this loan had been in liquidation for multiple years and there was no approval of the wrap-up extension.
We have 3 upcoming webinars in July. We found out that scheduling one before the 4th of July didn't work out, so we moved the 1051 to July 24th. Lance is putting together this a brand new webinar. New regulations involve July 1, so Lance is going to go through that and best practices and how to complete that form. Brent Chelino is going to do the one on July 16th and the regulator issues we talked about. And as we talked about last week, SBA did issue the notice. I confess I haven't had a chance to go through it, but we will take everything in detail on it. It was a proposed rule ready to go into effect in August that affects all of us. That may be something that you want to get your compliance people, your C-suite involved. And finally, we have our, 12th annual restaurant financing webinar on the 17th. Lance, what number is this? Where are we at, guys?
Well, one thing I want to comment, guys, I have some restaurant history. Family's been in the restaurant business for 25 plus years. The statistical information alone in this webinar is worth the price of admission.
Yeah, and we talk about trends. This is one of our fun ones we love doing, and we're going to do that. Hey, we are off next week, July 4th, Thursday. We're not going to be here, so if you tune in, you're going to hear crickets. Shout out to Katie. We have Lance. We have a new intern in the house. Katie's very first exposure to Coleman Publishing and you is this event, so she's probably overwhelmed right now. Give her a sense of telling her.
Hey, Katie, welcome to the team. We try to keep all the bankers in between the straight lines.
There we go. Hey, enjoy your 4th of July next week. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks a lot.
Happy 4th.